Hello, Dr. Richter here. I've been accused of rambling on, so I've shortened my also important presentation on omega-3 and heart health, and you will see what the connection is and why this is the only fix, and we'll jump right into it. The heart health is basically described as a number one topic in my book, Nourish and Flourish. It's written with a background story of Huckleberry Finn. So it's more interesting to the average reader. And I've also included omega-3 in my new stem cell book. And it's very exciting news if you want to know how modern stem cell therapy works together with omega-3. So here is the gist of it. 55 years ago, we found out that the Greenland Inuit tribes, or Eskimos, if you want to call them, have a very low heart attack rate and a very low omega-6 to 3 index. What does that mean? That means that their inflammation overall in their body is very low. So we basically attribute this to our origin from hunters and gatherers and what we now call the blue zones, which have the highest omega-3 in their diet. So when your omega-3 is in a desirable range over 8%, your inflammatory index goes down to 2 to 1 and even lower. So that lowers your risk of heart attack to almost zero. And I will show you the newest data on that. So there's a linear relationship between that inflammatory index and the health of blue zones and hunters and gatherers in the other parts of the world, in Canada and Japan, which are called Anui. And our Western world is rampant with inflammatory heart disease and a very high index. So very simple, when omega-3 gets above 8%, only then your index goes below 3 to 1. And vice versa, most people test with less than 3%, 2%. They're in the red, making a very high inflammatory index. So that ultimately leads to leaky gut, and that happens in your arterial walls. So the state of your overall cardiovascular system basically is inflammatory. The inflammasomes are continuously turned on. And not only can your heart not make proper ATP energy, but also the inflammation turns systemic. And I will get back to that very shortly here, how that works. So low omega-3 causes leaky gut, and that leaky gut destroys your cardiovascular system, and that in turn causes heart disease. So recent study, 2024, for every unit increase in this omega-6 to 3 ratio, your mortality increases by 2%. Doesn't sound like a lot, but we will see that most people test above 20 to 1 inflammatory and have less than 2% omega-3. You'll see that down here. So that number jumps very quickly, very significantly. And comparing the highest to the lowest quintiles of individuals, they have a 26% higher mortality. So now we know that your inflammatory index goes as high as 50 to 1. Best people with best diets and maybe marginal supplementation are at 8 to 1. And that is not a good comparison. This number will be a lot higher, as you will see. So even cancer is linked to this, and cancer and cardiovascular disease go together. So in this study, again, you can see there's a sharp incline at 8 to 1. At 8 to 1, everything turns exponential. Most people are above 8 to 1. If you're lucky, you're below 20 to 1. Most people, US average is 22 to 1. And at 8 to 1, it's basically turning in a state where your cardiovascular system takes years to recover. So this analysis is very robust, and it is very much shocking that this isn't a linear process. And cancer actually is linked to the same process. And what you see here is that at higher indices, and we are not, those are not rare, 30 to 1, 40 to 1. You will see that it's actually going down, meaning that after a certain index, you can't even fix the cancer problem anymore because the cancer takes advantage of this inflammatory state. And we know that from the Warburg effect and other things. So this is definitely exponential after 8 to 1. Very few people test 8 to 1. How does this work? Basically, omega-3 is anti-inflammatory. It makes these anti-inflammatory eicosanoids. And omega-6 is inflammatory. It turns on the inflammasome, macrophages 1, mainly through arachidonic acid. And this process is basically happening in your body. However, we can no longer produce any EPA from alpha-linolenic acid. Both of these obviously are essential. You need to get them in your diet. Previously, we were able to convert some of this from plants. Now we will not be able to make any more EPA. So your inflammatory index is 30 to 1 continuously chronic inflammation. So this pathway is very important, and traditionally we have enzymes that can basically take care of our omega-3 deficiency that no longer works. And we need to input EPA and DHA directly from cold water fish, which are the only animal species with a very high EPA content. Grass-fed, grass-finished beef is very hard to come by and very expensive. So the only solution is cold water fish, and we have vegan sources, of course. So again, more than 55 years ago, Dr. Bang and Dieberg conducted their first studies, and they found out that this is a 1-to-1, 100% correlation with the Inuit tribes and even other hunters and gatherers in Africa. And we found the mammoths to be basically extinct by humans with spears found in their fossils. So humans grew up on a fatty red meat diet and a fish diet that gives you a 1-to-1 inflammatory index. That is no longer true. We are now in this situation where everything is below 4% red, red, red. It takes years of supplementation to get over 8%. It's a slow process because your body has to incorporate omega-3 into every organ, every cell in your body. But it is possible. So again, here, one of the oldest articles, 1978, showing the relationship between omega-3 and atherosclerosis. This is all the stuff that omega-3 does. It's not just about inflammation. And it's a long list that needs to be discussed. Basically, summarize cardiovascular disease is directly related to inflammation, as I showed you already. Omega-3 creates proper lipid rafts in your nerves and brain function. Neurons cannot communicate, cannot have synaptic signals without omega-3. This then all leads to the metabolic syndrome, diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, liver disease, and dementia. They're all related to this phenomenon. Your immunity highly depends on omega-3, the function of the white blood cells and their communication. In an inflammatory state, your immunity then turns autoimmune, which is the topic for another talk. And that all goes into the hormones and endocrine system as well, thyroid health, and so on. It all starts at your digestion and gut health. That's what omega-3 fixes the first. So what are your odds? Number one killer is heart disease. 1 in 6 people die from heart disease. 1 in 7 die from cancer. So pretty much most people die from heart problems, cardiovascular problems, which is intricately related to cancer. Everything else comes after that. Number 3 is actually now medical induced problems from drugs and surgery. So here is the summary on how that study in 2007 already concluded that you need an omega-3 percentage in your membranes, in your cells of over 7%. Then your risk of heart attack goes down to almost nothing. This study doesn't even really reach 8%, but it is still shocking to see that your 100% chance of heart disease and stroke is basically at a level of almost 4% here. So 4% is high. Most people now test with 2.5%. Only when you get to 6.5%, that's when it gets interesting. And that may take a year, may take a year and a half. So none of the other blood markers really matter. Cholesterol is not a problem at all. It's a very vital protein. I mean, steroid fat that we need for our existence. And it's one of the biggest lies invented by Big Pharma to sell statins. And here you can see that there is no relationship between cholesterol and your risk of heart disease. So only omega-3 in blue here basically is responsible for your heart attack risk. So the other ones follow. So CRP is a marker for inflammation. It's going down, of course, but it's not the responsible culprit here. Homocysteine is another marker. But cholesterol and triglycerides, and obviously some of the cholesterol markers go down, but they are not responsible. They're just running along. So when you are getting balanced, which again, in this highest quartile, you're not fully balanced, then your cholesterol balances out as well. So just a reminder, your cell is packed with membranes, not the outer cell itself. Every single organelle in your cell, including the mitochondria, your powerhouses, and the endoplasmatic reticulum that makes proteins, is basically the membrane galore. And all of these lines here are lipids, 21 million lipids in your cell. And your cell is packed with lipids. All the functions in the cell are reliant on lipids and therefore omega-3. So back to heart health and how that works. So in your heart, you have a lipid called cardiolipin, and it actually has 4 polyunsaturated chains, which you see here, 1, 2, 3, 4. And this lipid is specific to the heart mitochondria. Without the heart mitochondria, it does not work. And the mitochondria basically rely on this cardiolipin, and its function relies on omega-3. I'll show you how that works. So the mitochondria are the powerhouses. They contain the oxidative chain here of many proteins in the inner membrane of the mitochondria, which create the gradient, which is then used to make ATP, and ATP is our energy carrier. 32 ATP are made in this chain, and you need oxygen for that. You need aerobic capabilities. And data shows that none of these proteins work without omega-3. So then you can't really use aerobic energy, and you rely on sugar and anaerobic capabilities, which cancer takes advantage of. And that's probably one of the reasons that it is linked. So this looks more complicated than it actually is, but the cardiolipin here interacts directly with the protein sitting in the membrane, either the sites identified, and it actually traps the protons. So the cardiolipin is necessary for the function of these proteins. They do not work without lipids, and the cardiolipin does not work properly without omega-3. So how do we know that? In the so-called Barth syndrome, kids get very sick. It's a genetic disease where your mitochondria start dying because you can't make enough cardiolipin. These organized interior lamella that make the energy are now disorganized, and the mitochondria are bloated up. And literally what happens is that the cardiolipin, when it's damaged or non-existent, kicks out the cytochrome C, that important protein that I showed you to make ATP with oxygen. It's literally causing mitochondria to die, and then the whole cell dies. So your body always prefers omega-3, which is in this case here 22 to 6. The numbers basically mean the length and then the number of double bonds. So you start out here at 0. Most people have almost no omega-3. As I've shown you already, almost all omega-6. And when you start supplementing in this experiment, the omega-6 gets kicked out and replaced by omega-3. So you are basically in a healthy state when these are 1-to-1, and that's what these two parallel lines here show. This only is in cardiolipin in the heart, but all lipids in all organs basically require this. And up to 50% of your lipids actually contain omega-3. So again, what about the arteries and arteriosclerosis? Especially the capillaries are important in cardiovascular disease, and we know that obviously you get a heart attack if you have coronary problems. So your heart mitochondria don't work, the muscle does not produce enough energy, oxygen doesn't get to the coronaries, and less oxygen gets to the muscle. It's a vicious cycle. So how does that work? The interior of your arteries is lined with a lining called glycocalyx, fine little hairs that keep it protected. When you damage this glycocalyx by oxidizing omega-3, you basically cause these epithelial cells, the cell line wall of your arteries, to die, which you see here in the green. The cells are dead. So this is what's basically causing omega-3 to be responsible for the lining of your interior arteries, preventing it from leaky gut. And it's a very good experiment, and it's very obvious that you need omega-3. So again, the low levels of oxygen were already sufficient to degrade this glycocalyx, and then it's a vicious cycle, because without omega-3, you can't really have functional mitochondria, and then the cells die even more, and inflammation starts leaking into the entire system, systematic inflammation. So leaky gut in your intestines basically causes leaky joints, leaky teeth, leaky ears, and the problem turns systemic. It does not just affect your heart, it affects everything. And autoimmunity is the next step. So once again, the high omega-6 to 3 index causes metabolic syndrome through its inflammasome. That is basically a assembly of inflammation and inflammatory cells turned on by omega-6. So when these cells break down, omega-6 turns on this inflammasome, and it turns into another vicious cycle. And this in cause is the reason for cardiovascular disease and hypertension. And then nothing works anymore. Even the smallest amounts of salt will give you problems because your kidneys cannot regulate the blood pressure anymore in their fine capillaries. So again, the omega-6 is inflammatory, and it docks directly to these cells, and their receptors turn on inflammation and allow more reactive oxygen species to come into the game, and you start a vicious cycle. So the summary here, again, without aerobic function and without a proper glycocalyx, your arterial cells don't work. You form plaques and you form lesions in the gut. And this is all 100% linear related to the omega-6 to 3 index, meaning most people now have 40-to-1 more omega-6, and going down to a 2-to-1 ratio takes time. So just very briefly, cholesterol, again, has no relationship to mortality. Quite the opposite. If you go below 180 in cholesterol, your mortality goes up 2.5 times. And why would you want to inhibit a vital steroid fat that actually is made in your liver, because it is so important? If it is in abundance in your body, 600 grams of cholesterol in an 80-kilogram human body, that's how important it is. Obviously, if your cholesterol goes up to 300, you have other problems, comorbidities, and the 220 level of cholesterol is optimal. There's, again, no relationship, as I showed you earlier, between cholesterol and heart disease. Yeah, so one last slide again here. How does this work again? So what is the difference between 6 and 3? 6 is down here in blue, the inflammatory. And that's exactly where your ibuprofen actually works. It inhibits these COX enzymes, blocks them so you don't make inflammation. But you always will be chasing a cat's tail if you don't balance it out with anti-inflammatory omega-3. And how would you know that? You basically test, and you use our tests or somebody else's test, and then you test again, and then you know that you will be in the green. And this incredibly unbalanced omega-6 ratio can be fixed if you have non-rancid omega-3 that basically is stabilized. Ours is stabilized with polyphenols. Most manufacturers don't care, and we've done 1.3 million tests that show that there's only 3 products in the world that are not rancid. So why waste your time with something that doesn't work? You should definitely jump on the wagon and get this into balance and reduce your heart attack chance by almost 100%. Hope that all helps, and in the comments, and contact me if you have any questions. omega3health.us is my website, omega3health.us.